Hello. In this video, I'm just gonna this is gonna be like the tutorial video describing everything you need to know to work with GitCAD in the workflow that is expected to be used. So, all right, most of all of this is covered over here down in this section under Git aliases. So it's kind of mostly important to just read through all of this, and then also if you click on here, read through everything in here. If you're lazy and you don't really want to go through all of that, here is the TLDR, or TLDW, I guess in this case. Just once GitCAD is installed, whenever you want to do any Git operations, right, just source into the activation function. So basically just do source, if I can spell it, user scripts activate, and then you'll see this, and it'll say this activate. This will have this in parentheses over here, and then you're good to go. Just leave it like that. Also, make sure that in your config file, make sure required git activation is set to true, because that will help remind you if you are trying to do something without having GitCAD being activated in your terminal session. Obviously, whenever you create a new terminal session, you're going to have to do that whole source thing again. Source, FreeCAD, user scripts, activate, and then reactivate it. To deactivate, you can just do deactivate GitCAD. Cool. So that's how you do that. So that is, and this works as well for PowerShell. For PowerShell, it's literally the exact same thing. Just don't omit the source over here. In fact, I'll just, I think I can show you pretty quickly. If I go to here, and if I go to, let's go to here, and just open this in terminal. For here, it's FreeCAD, user scripts, activate, just run it, and then there you go, done. You don't have to add source at the bottom, and you can just deactivate the same way, like that. So PowerShell and Bash, Git Bash are both supported, but that's what you want to do. So yeah, so that's the TLDR basically, and such TLDW. Just make sure this is set to true, and then whenever you're doing anything with Git, with FreeCAD, just make sure that you source into that file, and then Git works just as you normally would expect it to, right? Now, under the hood, right, so this is basically where we actually start the tutorial. What this is actually doing, right, is that it is replacing, if you type in, like, if I type in which git, you'll see it's actually pathing to this file over here in the same repository over here. So it's this file over here. And if I deactivate GitCAD and I do which git, you'll see now it's in the normal place where Git is installed, right? So all this is doing when you source into this, right, is it is for this terminal session only in this terminal session. Like if I create another terminal session and I do which git, so if I do like which git here, if I create another terminal session and it's like which git, you'll see it doesn't carry it on. So this is just for this local terminal session, right? All it's doing is it's redirecting all standard Git calls to first go and pass through this bash script over here, and that is located over here. Okay, and what it's doing is it is checking like what type of Git command you're calling. Are you calling a Git checkout? Are you calling Git reset? Are you calling Git stash? If it's any of those, then instead of calling Git itself, you want to call this alias that has been made over here. For file checkouts, it's Git fco. If I do, I guess, yeah. Yeah. So all it's doing is basically redirecting normal Git calls to an alias. So instead of calling Git reset, it's calling Git f reset. So if you call Git reset, it will call Git, but it will call git freset, and with the git command equal reset, so that it knows what was the intended call over here, right? Git freset is an alias, a git alias, that is defined when you run the initialization script for you, when you run this initialize repo. All the way at the bottom over here, you have all these aliases that get set up for you. So if I go to code.git/config, here's the config file, and you'll see we have all these aliases that get defined for you in your git config file for this repository over here. So most of all of what this video is going to be is me going over all these aliases and how they work, right? But some of these aliases are, as I said, meant to basically be a complete replacement for the base freset that you call. And by a replacement, what I mean is it basically does its own logic and then calls. So like in the case of file checkout, it'll first do its own logic to check a bunch of stuff about the file, the working directory, and then it will eventually go ahead and call an actual git checkout, right? And when it does that, then it does more checks, and then that's how it works. It's basically just a wrapper that's wrapping around the base git logic. So in these cases where the script is supposed to be a complete, like you're supposed to use this at all times instead of the base git call, that's what this will redirect it to. So if it's git checkout, it will call that thing or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But in any case, if it's not a stash, if it's not a reset, and if it's not a git checkout, then it will just basically call, it will just pass it right through to the original git repository, the actual git executable, and all the arguments that you normally have. So that's basically what this wrapper script does. Yeah. So now on to the demo for what all these aliases do and how they work. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to do two things. First, I am going to go ahead and deactivate GitCAD, and I am also going to go into my config file, and I'm going to set this require GitCAD activation to false. If this is set to true, then if you do a command and you don't have GitCAD activated, it's likely that the command will fail, and it will say, please activate GitCAD. That's just there to remind you if you don't have it activated, in case you forget. But in this case, since I'm trying to show you the git aliases in their raw form, I'm going to go ahead and disable GitCAD, the requirement for GitCAD to be activated at all times. Right. So with that being said, I am going to go and cd into a test directory. So freecad test active test. And if I do ls-l, we'll see that we have two freecad files over here for me to show how all of these aliases work for. So if you go to the README file on the official repository and you click Get Aliases, you'll get this documentation over here. This documentation is actually included with all. It's in whenever if you download GitCAD and install it, it's under the FreeCAD Automation docs folder, added aliases. That's what this markdown file is over here essentially. So here you can see. Yeah, so here you can see all the aliases that have been added and how they are complete replacements. So the first thing, so instead of calling, so git add is, I guess, a little bit of a special case. All that add is doing is, if I go ahead, let me open up the git, or the config file, the .git config file. So if you call git fadd, right? What it does is it runs git add, but it specifies that the git command is equal to add, right? And this is important because there is a clean filter for FC standard files, and this filter goes, and depending on the type of git command that it detects that initiated this filter to trigger, it will do different things. And the main important thing is that if it detects add was called, it will not exit early, it will just pass it right through, and then it gets down to here where it will actually go ahead and export the file, right? So the point is that git fadd calls add, but let's GitCAD know that it is okay for you to go and extract or export the contents of a FreeCAD file if there's modifications to it. So let's just demo that right here. So if I make a change, I'm also gonna just check locks that I have for locks. Yeah, okay. All right, let's open this FreeCAD file. Cool. Okay, we have this FreeCAD file open. Subsequently, it shouldn't be that long. Anyways, so we're gonna go C and D. We're gonna click save. Cool, we've made some modification. Close out of this. And if I do git status, we'll see that we have a file that has been modified. If I do a git add on that assembly example file, nothing happened. And you'll notice that nothing got exported either. If I do git status, we'll see that it's added a modified assembly example file. And this modified file is actually the file with actual bits of data to it. It basically didn't even so much, and that actually should probably change. I'm gonna need to change that in this clean filter at some point, because that there should be a warning. What I'm trying to say is if you do this, it should warn you that you're basically making a big mistake, and it shouldn't even let you add the file with bits installed. But anyways, this modification that you're adding over here is basically the actual FC standard file in its entirety. It's not actually, because normally what happens when you with GitCAD is that the only thing you commit is an empty FC standard file to Git. But in this case, this has actually got a FC standard file with actual bits associated with it. So if I push this up to GitHub, you would actually see this thing had data in it. So anyways, I'm gonna go and git restore staged dot. Yeah, something like a warning like this should be up here. But anyways, so yeah, so the file that we have, this modified file, and now if I do git fadd instead, it doesn't do, oh, that's why. It didn't actually path to it correctly. Huh? Whatever. Okay, I somehow didn't path correctly to it, but whatever. Yeah, that's wild. I'm gonna have to take a look into that. Anyways, but if you do git fadd now, right, you'll see now it actually exports the contents of the FreeCAD file. If I do git status, we'll see that now we have the actual contents over here. You can do git add at this point or fadd, both of them are fine. You can do git status, you'll see that now we actually have the file contents to commit and change. So yeah, so fadd basically allows you to actually export it. In the future, if you do just git add over here, it shouldn't make this modification. It should just give you a warning, and it should commit it as an empty file. Like from Git's perspective, the file will be empty, so you would have to like remodify the file or resave those changes that you have made in that file for Git to actually recognize that there are changes to actually, yeah. But yeah, so that's how that should work in the future. I'm gonna make a note of that real quick. All right. Right, so next alias. So after fadd, and just so you know, like if you have GitCAD activated, where it says GitCAD in parentheses on the side over there, or like this, if you have this activated, then obviously it's going to git add will implicitly call git fadd instead of, so you don't have to remember that if you have this sourced. All right, cool. All right, on to the next one. So then git lock. Git lock is used to do LFS locking. if you go ahead and don't have the lock to a file, so if I do xdg-open assembly example, and I'm going to git unlock the file. Now we see that that file is no longer in the list of locks that are owned. If I go into here, and if I try to make a change to the file, it should fail because it's read-only, provided that you have the edit parameters, document, backup policy set to false. If I try to make a change, you'll see I get this error warning. Basically, it failed to open the file because it's set to read-only, so you can't do it. But if you lock the file, now you can make the change, and it did go through. If I do git status, you'll see that that file now has changes associated with it. All right, so that is locking and unlocking. Obviously, if you try to lock a file that you do not own, so for instance, you see that there is this file over here that is owned by this person. And if I try to lock that file, I think it might not work unless I export it first, because that's technically not. If I try to lock it, you see I get this error, locking failed, lock exists. Basically, lock exists because this guy owns it. Yeah. So that's how that works. But you can steal a lock. If I did lock dash force, I'm not going to do that. But if you did that, then it will basically unlock it and then relock it. You obviously have to have admin rights from the according to the LFS server, depending on like the whatever server that is that stores your LFS files. You need admin rights in order to be able to forcibly steal a lock and forcibly unlock a lock that you do not own. But yeah. So that's locking and unlocking. Let me go ahead and cool. Okay, so that's that. So what's the next thing? So git locks shows you the list of locks, reset, right? Cool. So cool. So the next one is, instead of using git reset, right, you call git freset and you say hard. Or in this case, I'm going to do git freset dash hard to basically clear the data over here. But git freset is what you call instead. And then that will actually do all this logic for importing the correct data. If you didn't do git freset, then it's not actually going to re-import the data. In fact, actually what's going to happen is that if I do a git reset hard on a file that has a modification, so let's go ahead and modify, let's make a modification here. Make a save here. Right, cool. Now I'm going to do a git reset hard instead of git freset without GitCAD activated. And it will go through. This should actually also have a, this really ought to have a warning associated with it. I'm going to add that to my list of to-dos. Yeah, so now if I do ls -l freecad tests active tests, we'll see that this file has 0 bytes associated with it. So when I did git reset over here, what it did was it actually resetted it, but it reset the file, but it didn't import the data associated with that file. So if I try to open this file now, you'll see that it will fail as soon as it actually loads. Yeah, there you go. It says exception invalid file because the file actually has 0 data associated with it inside that file. So yeah, so that's why if you do forget to do that, you're just going to have to do git fimport to manually re-import that data, so that when you do ls-l, you actually see that that file has data associated with it, and so you can open it up manually. Once again, oh right, pathing to the wrong file, but it would show you the same thing. Because if I do git ls-l, I'm in the root. I think ls-l. You see I have this file and it has 0 bytes of data associated with it, which was not what the one I want to open up. I want to actually open up the one in FreeCAD. Now it will actually open up correctly, and you'll see that file I will have. Yeah, cool. So yeah, so that's how that works. That's how all of that works. Yeah, so next one, let's go ahead and actually go ahead and do a git status hard. Cool. There we go. So now we are over here. So git reset, and that's just a regular git reset if you have GitCAD activated. Git stash is replaced with git fstash. I'm not even going to go over the rest of these stuff because basically it's literally all the same. I'm just saying is that instead of calling git stash at all times, what you're going to want to do is you're going to call git fstash if you do not have GitCAD activated. That is why I highly, highly recommend that you go into the config file and you keep this set to true. It is set to true by default, but yeah, you set this to true, and then whenever you're working with this repository, you basically source into FreeCAD user scripts activate, and then have this activated. And that way you can have peace of mind knowing that your Git calls are always going to be redirected to the correct Git alias as it is needed. But yeah. So, yeah, so instead of calling stash, you call git fstash. Instead of calling, okay, I guess I should show checkout. So for checkout, you can actually just use the standard git checkout, and then new branch, right? This will work. You can actually this is all you have to do for checkout. But the only time when you have to use an alias for checkout is if you're doing a file checkout. So let's say I wanted to go onto checkout main, and then I want to import this this file here, right? This is a file checkout because I'm specifying specifically what file I want to check out from this commit / branch. In this case, you do not do this. You just replace git checkout with git fco, git file checkout, or git. Technically, F is for FreeCAD, but yeah, git f checkout. So this is the replacement for file checkouts. But in all other cases, you do not, and fco is only for file checkouts. You do not do git fco like main if you wanted to check out main. In fact, I'm pretty sure she's going to give you an error. Yeah, invalid arguments. It's going to be git fco commit file. The hyphen is optional between the file and between that and the files. That's optional. See, it works both ways. But yeah. So for file checkout, you work it like that. For git fcmod, this is not actually, so this is what you run if you want to suppress a modification that you have made to a file and not actually commit it. So for example, let's say I go ahead and let's just check the git status, right? Let's go and open assembly example and see the current state of this file. So we have this file over here. I'm going to go ahead and make some changes to this file. I'm going to save it. I'm going to close. And if I do a git status, we'll see that that file is modified. But let's say that this file, although it says it's modified, I actually don't really want it to be modified. You can do git fcmod, and then you can path to the file, or you can just add the pattern, and you can do star.fc standard, and that will go in through every file in your directory that ends with fc standard. It will go ahead and apply this this thing to. This quotes are important because if you don't do the quotes, star.fc standard actually just expands out to the .fc standard files in the root directory. So if I do ls, it will basically expand out to these two. So if I do git fcmod and I type star.fc standard, what I'm actually doing is the shell itself will intercept that and replace it with this, which is not what we want. We want to actually have star.fc standard so that we are actually matching this specific pattern. We don't want the shell to expand it out to these files. But yeah, so and then you'll see it's, notice that this is the only file over here that was shown as modified, and it cleared the modification for that file. So if I do git status, we'll see that the file is not there. But if we open up the file, we'll see that the modifications are still present in the binary of the file. But if we go to go and import that file, and we were to open it up again, we would see that all of the data is gone from that file because we never actually exported the contents of that file to the directory associated with it. And so if we were to, basically Git never stored any of the data for that file. So fcmod is just there to clear the modification for a FreeCAD file if for whatever reason you want to clear the modification associated with it and just hide it away from Git. That is what you do. So it basically makes Git think that the file is empty in the background. Git ftool, I'm not going to really go over this, but if you type git ftool, you can see the usage for it. But basically, this gives you access to the Python script that I have written that is used to handle importing and exporting data from the uncompressed directory into the .fc standard file that it is associated with. And there are a bunch of parameters you can give it. But for the most part, all you really need to do is git git fimport and git fexport, as was shown earlier with git import. So import, you just go git fimport and then path to the file, as was shown earlier, and it will go ahead and import the stuff. If I go and make a modification to this file once again, real quick, save. If I do git status, you'll see I have this modified file. I can do git fexport and then FreeCAD test active test assembly example, and it will go and manually export that file. If I do git status, you'll see that now the data from that file has been extracted into the directory it is associated with. So now if I do a let's do git fco head and then FreeCAD tests assembly example. So this is a file checkout where we're checking out the head commit, check out this from the head commit. Now, if I do git status, interesting how that did not work as intended, but that I'll look into that. I'll figure out what's going on over there with that, but because it's a little bit weird. Just try. I paused incorrectly. That would kind of do it, right? Active test. Active test. That's an example. There we go. That's what I wanted. There we go. All right, cool. Now if I do git status, yeah, it kind of it overwrote the. Yeah, right. Never mind. That didn't work quite as intended as I wanted it to because it overwrote it. But anyways, point is export works as intended and FCO works as intended. But if, just in case you're curious, if I open up the file, you'll see that it will have reverted all the changes. The changes are back to how they were. I forgot that it would clear out these modifications to the directory as well. I thought it would just do it to the file itself, but I forgot. But anyways, yeah, so that is get fmport, get fexport, ftool, and all of these aliases explained. So again, the important ones is that if you decide to forego using the GitCAD environment, or like the GitCAD terminal environment, just always replace every add operation with fadd, and for every reset operation, use get freset instead, and for every stash operation, use get fstash instead. For every file checkout like this, use fco. Do not use git checkout. If you're just doing a regular branch checkout, so like if I let's just make a modification and commit it as you would expect. Let's make this modification, close out of this, git status, git f dot m added c and d. Oh, git checkout dash b, and then a new branch. Oh, I git branch dash d, new branch. All right, and then let's go ahead and make a new modification to it. Let's go ahead and open, yeah, there we go. So let's open this file again, make a new change, E and F, close this, get fadd dot, get fadd dot, added a D and, or E and F. Cool. You can now do a git checkout of the active test, and it will go ahead and import correctly. So basically, for regular branch commits, just using regular git checkout is fine. There's no special alias. The only time you need an alias for a checkout is if you're doing a file checkout in which you are checking out a specific file from a specific branch. That's the only time. So git status. Yeah, cool. So that is basically everything. Let me just double check my list of things. Lock unlock, locks, freset, fstash, file checkouts, fcmod, ftool. Yep. All right, there you go. So that's everything. Thank you.